The 18th of July, 1987, 4:42 p.m., Port of Miami, Florida. The summer sun glistened over the bustling port of Miami as the Ocean Splendor, a mid-sized luxury cruise liner bound for the Caribbean, prepared for departure. It was the ship's last voyage before a month-long maintenance dry dock. The pier was filled with families waving goodbye, couples sipping champagne, and stewards calling out final boarding announcements. Among the passengers walking up the gangway were Dr. Elias Monroe, 41, a respected cardiologist from Charlotte, North Carolina, and his wife, Dr. Marissa Monroe, 38, a pediatric oncologist at a regional hospital. Both were admired for their dedication to their patients, and both unusually had taken this trip at the last minute. They weren't cruise people, but something had changed. Elias's younger brother, Marcus, who had driven them to the port, leaned in for a quick hug. "Try not to overanalyze the buffet. You're allowed to relax." Elias smiled. "We'll be unreachable for a few days. Enjoy the silence," Marissa added with a grin. "And if something happens, just blame the shrimp." He laughed, not knowing it would be the last time he'd ever see them. The cabin, the 19th of July, 1987, 9:16 a.m. Ocean Splendor, Cabin 7B, upper deck. Their room was modest but elegant. A corner suite with a private balcony. The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains as Marissa flipped through a brochure for onboard spa treatments. Elias sat beside her, sipping black coffee and reading a dog-eared medical thriller. They had chosen to disconnect completely. No pagers, no contact with the hospital, not even a postcard. For once in their careers, they had agreed this week was just for them. They dined alone that evening, seated at table 14 near a window that looked out over the endless ocean. A ship photographer came by and snapped a picture, the kind meant for the cruise souvenir wall. It would later become the most circulated image in the investigation. The disappearance, the 21st of July, 1987, 6:30 a.m. Ocean Splendor, daily logbook. When the ship docked briefly in Nassau, the Monroes didn't disembark. Housekeeping reported their cabin untouched that morning. Beds still made, clothes neatly folded, their luggage still in the closet, but they were gone. No one had seen them at breakfast. They hadn't attended the late-night jazz show the evening prior. Their keycard hadn't registered any activity since the previous afternoon. By noon, the crew initiated the missing person protocol. By the time the ship returned to Miami on the 25th of July, the Coast Guard had already launched an inquiry. Statements were taken. The vessel was searched from bow to stern. Surveillance tapes were reviewed. Nothing. No signs of struggle. No indication of suicide. No witnesses. No goodbye note. No trace. Only their cabin remained pristine and silent, as if the sea had simply taken them. The 25th of July, 1987, 9:50 a.m. United States Coast Guard Station, Miami Beach. The Ocean Splendor had barely completed its docking procedures when Lieutenant Commander Rachel Monroe, no relation to the missing couple, stood at the stern of the pier, reviewing the preliminary incident report. 2 missing passengers, married, both medical professionals, no prior history of mental illness or suspicious behavior. Disappearance occurred somewhere between Nassau and the Bohemian coast. The crew's internal search had turned up nothing. Lieutenant Monroe scanned the ship's layout, making notes in the margin. No CCTV coverage on upper exterior decks in 1987. No record of cabin door activity after the 20th of July, 5:47 p.m. No use of room service, pool access, or event attendance that evening. It didn't make sense. People go overboard. People run. But couples like this, with no signs of conflict, no debt, no known enemies, didn't just vanish. A controlled sweep. The 25th of July, 1987, 2:15 p.m. On board the Ocean Splendor, the Coast Guard boarded the ship that afternoon with cadets and divers. Every closet, storage compartment, and crew hallway was combed. Divers checked beneath lifeboats and along the ship's waterline for any injury or clothing caught on hull rivets. The Monroes' personal effects were logged and bagged. 2 books, 1 medical thriller, 1 poetry collection, a jewelry box untouched, 3 neatly folded letters unsealed but blank, a disposable camera, undeveloped, prescription sunglasses, and a leather-bound notebook. In the bathroom drawer, Elias's watch and a hairbrush with loose blonde strands. The ship's captain, Harold Clean, 62, was cooperative but defensive. "I've run 211 voyages without a single man lost," he insisted. "If those 2 went missing, it wasn't on my ship. Someone brought it with them." The remark stood out. The family's response: the 26th of July, 1987, 10:22 a.m. Charlotte, North Carolina, Monroe residence. Marcus Monroe sat with investigators in his brother's kitchen. The house was immaculate. Family pictures lined the hallway. Medical journals were scattered on the coffee table. The refrigerator still held half a bottle of wine opened the night before they left. He told them everything. Elias had no enemies. Marissa had recently received a grant for cancer research. They had booked the cruise last minute using points from a pharmaceutical conference. He remembered one strange thing. He asked if I could check the mailbox while he was gone, and then he hesitated like he wanted to add something, but he just said never mind and smiled. It was nothing, but it lingered. 3 days after the report was filed, the Coast Guard's official position was announced: presumed lost at sea. No evidence of foul play, but to those who knew the Monroes, that conclusion felt like a placeholder, because nothing about the couple's final hours or their cabin explained what would happen next. 8 years later, a patrol unit off the coast of Kyogo would send in a coded report that would blow the case wide open. But for now, all that remained were 2 names on a manifest and a silence that wouldn't go away. The 2nd of August, 1987, 3:47 p.m., downtown Miami, Blue Wave Photo Processing Center. It was a slow Sunday afternoon when Leonard Voss, a 63-year-old technician with decades of experience in film processing, noticed something strange. He was developing rolls submitted by the Ocean Splendor Cruise Company, mostly tourists' disposable cameras, when a single strip of negatives caught his eye. Unlike the bright, casual snapshots of sunsets and pina coladas, this roll had only 3 images. They were dimly lit, slightly underexposed, likely taken indoors. The timestamp handwritten on the envelope: Cabin 7B, Roll 3, developed on request. Leonard peered through his magnifier. Photo 1. Elias Monroe standing in the cabin near the balcony door. His expression unreadable. Marissa's hand rests lightly on his shoulder, as if posing yet not smiling. Photo 2. An empty hallway. Dim, taken from inside their cabin, angled toward the main corridor. A shadow in the left corner. Unclear whether human or object. Photo 3. A mirror selfie. Both Monroes visible, blurry, standing at an odd angle, but behind them, barely discernible. Something else in the reflection, a silhouette. It didn't match either of them. Leonard's hands trembled slightly as he clipped the photos to dry. He'd seen all kinds of odd vacation images in his career, but something about these disturbed him. He set the photos aside to be logged and sent to the cruise company. They were never picked up. An anonymous tip: the 11th of August, 1987, 6:02 p.m. Charlotte Police Department, Missing Persons Division. Detective Melanie Ruiz, assigned to the Monroe case, received an unmarked envelope in her mailbox. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside, a Xeroxed copy of the 3rd photo, the mirror shot, scrolled across the bottom in pen. Look closer. They weren't alone. The original image was still in evidence, so the photocopy shouldn't exist. She had a photographic analyst review it. The analyst noted, the silhouette in the mirror appears too tall to be standing normally. The angle suggests it was taken inside the bathroom, yet the mirror shows more than the interior should reflect. A possible light distortion or double exposure, but no camera defects were found on the roll. Ruiz kept the photo in her desk drawer away from official reports. She wasn't superstitious, but the unease lingered. By the end of August, the Monroe case had all but faded from the public eye. No suspects, no motive, no remains. But buried in a manila envelope in a cold evidence room, 3 photographs waited, unclaimed and unexplained. Photos of a couple who vanished without reason, and an image that suggested they hadn't been alone in their final moments. The 24th of August, 1987, 11:03 a.m. Charlotte, North Carolina. Marcus Monroe's residence. It had been over a month since Elias and Marissa vanished, and Marcus Monroe had barely slept. His days were consumed with reporters, calls from investigators, and endless forms for next of-kin status. But none of it haunted him like the letter he found tucked between two medical textbooks in Elias's home office. It was written on cream-colored stationery, folded carefully, never sealed, never mailed. The address, Dr. Malcolm Foster, a name Marcus recognized, a controversial researcher in Baltimore who had previously worked with Elias on a cardiac neurostimulation study. The letter read, quote, "Malcolm, if anything happens during this trip, you'll know where to look. You warned me once that some doors shouldn't be opened, but I opened one anyway, and so did she. Don't trust what they'll say. The file isn't in my office. It's where we first met, underneath the plaque. Same key. If it's still there, burn it. End." Marcus stared at the signature. It was unmistakably his brother's, but he had no idea what it meant. The researcher. The 3rd of September, 1987, 1:19 p.m., Baltimore, Maryland. Office of Dr. Malcolm Foster. Detective Melanie Ruiz flew to Baltimore with a copy of the letter in hand. Dr. Foster, 58, thin, intense, with nicotine-stained fingers and restless eyes, read it without saying a word. Then he locked his office door. "I told Elias 2 years ago not to get involved. There were conferences, clinical trials being run through shell hospitals. They were using cruise ships for unregulated field testing." Ruiz raised her eyebrow. "Field testing of what?" Foster exhaled slowly. "Cognitive suppressants, environmental triggers, sensory alteration. We were studying how environments could influence decision M, but some of those projects went beyond ethical boundaries. He must have found out something." He walked across the room and lifted a small brass plaque mounted to the wall. "First Principles in Practice. Founded 1978. Behind it, a small hollow, empty. He was right, he said. "It's gone." A name surfaces. Ruiz pressed for more. Foster finally gave her a name. Dr. Vinh An Nguyen, a Vietnamese-American neurologist and former contractor with the Defense Biomed Research Lab. He had disappeared in 1985, 2 years before the Monroes. Last seen boarding a cargo vessel in Panama under contract for an atmospheric stress response study. No one had heard from him since. But as Ruiz returned to Charlotte, her suspicion deepened. What exactly had Elias and Marissa Monroe stepped into? In the back of her file, Ruiz inserted the letter with a sticky note. Elias knew something. The trip was a cover. Find the original file. But it would take nearly 8 more years before that file or anything else surfaced. And when it did, it wasn't from an informant or a researcher or an agency. It came from the open sea. The 12th of September, 19956. 4:02 a.m. Gulf of Mexico, 40 nautical miles west of Dry Tortugas. The U.S. CGC Callahan, a patrol cutter on routine operations, was making slow progress through low morning fog. Chief Petty Officer Luis Calderon, a seasoned seaman with over 2 decades of Gulf assignments, was manning the radar station when he noticed something strange. An unregistered vessel roughly 38 to 42 foot long, drifting northeast without engine activity. No transponder, no distress signal, no visual flag. Calderon alerted the bridge. Captain Jenna Hoy ordered an immediate visual check. Within 15 minutes, the cutter approached the vessel. It was a Monte Verde-class pleasure yacht, pristine white, some algae growth on the hull, but otherwise intact. No signs of damage. The nameplate on the stern had been removed. There were no visible persons on board. The boarding party found the yacht eerily silent. No birds, no breeze, no hum of machinery, just the gentle slap of seawater against fiberglass. Calderon stepped aboard first, followed by 2 junior officers. Inside, the cabin was clean, untouched, almost like a display at a showroom. But then they opened the main storage compartment. Inside, 2 duffel bags with water, damaged passports, several medical journals, a stethoscope etched with the name E. Monroe, a sealed marine container labeled for retrieval, Maritime Archive, DRK level access only. It was locked with a biometric reader and finally wedged between cushions in the cabin's sitting nook, a single 4x6 photograph. The photograph, it was an old snapshot, faded but dry, protected in a small plastic sleeve. The image showed Elias and Marissa Monroe standing on a dock, presumably before boarding the Ocean Splendor. Behind them, just barely visible, was a third figure, mid-turn, half obscured, wearing a black blazer, but with no visible face. The handwriting on the back read, "We never left the ship. Immediate protocol." Upon returning to shore, the Coast Guard flagged the find under Level 3 Anomaly Protocol. The biometric container was transferred to a federal liaison. The Monroe case, previously closed in 1992 as a cold file, was reopened under the designation incident R-876, civilian disappearance, classified material recovered. Detective Ruiz, now retired, but still following the case in silence, received a call from a blocked number that same night. The voice on the line said only, "You were right, but it's bigger than the Monroes." Then silence. The yacht was impounded. The container disappeared into federal custody, and yet the photograph remained, copied, circulated. Whispers of it reached old journalists, ex-contractors, and retired investigators like Ruiz. Something had floated back, but whether it had ever truly left remained unknown, because now the question was no longer just what happened to the Monroes. It was why were they allowed to be found. September 17, 1997, a Monsieur Charlotte, North Carolina, Ruiz residence. Former Detective Melanie Ruiz hadn't heard that name in years. Monroe. When the call came in, she was tending to her small garden, radio playing soft jazz, retired life quietly unfolding. The man on the phone identified himself as Adrian Keller, a federal liaison with the Department of Civil Maritime Recovery, a title she had never heard before. "We'd like to speak with you regarding the Elias and Marissa Monroe case," he said. Ruse felt her spine stiffen. "It's a closed file," she answered. "Not anymore," Keller replied. "We recovered something." They agreed to meet the next day at a public library in downtown Raleigh, neutral ground. The meeting, the 18th of September, 1995, 2:07 p.m. Raleigh Public Library, Archives Wing. Keller was younger than she expected, maybe mid-32nd, pressed black suit, plain tie, and eyes that didn't blink enough. He carried a metal briefcase and a clipboard. "I'm not with the FBI or Homeland," he said up front. "I work with a task force formed post-Liberty Shore. We monitor maritime anomalies, events that don't fit typical disappearance patterns." Ruiz leaned in. "Like ships returning without people." "Exactly," he said. Keller opened the briefcase. Inside were scans of the items recovered from the drifting yacht, the photograph of the Monroes on the dock, a passport fragment confirmed as Marissa's, and a transcript of a partial audio log decrypted from the marine-grade container. Ruiz held her breath. The audio log was timestamped the 24th of October, 1987, 1:42 a.m., 3 months after the Monroes were reported missing. Elias's voice, faint, strained. "We don't know where we are. The lights haven't stopped flickering since yesterday. Marissa's still hearing the tones. We tried to turn back, but the compass keeps spinning. Every attempt to contact the Coast Guard fails. It's like we're not on any frequency anymore. If anyone finds this, please tell our families this was never a vacation." Then static, and then a second voice softer. "Marissa, they're not letting us leave. It's not the ship. It's underneath it." The recording ended. Ruiz pushed the paper away. "What is this?" Keller didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "There have been others. Not many, but enough." Ruiz left the library with a copy of the transcript and a lingering chill. What she had chased in 1987 wasn't a simple missing persons case, and now, nearly a decade later, it was resurfacing with implications far beyond the Monroe family. Because somewhere in a locked vault in a building with no official name, someone now had proof that the Monroes had survived for at least 3 months after they vanished, and maybe longer. The 3rd of October, 1995, 6:21 p.m. Johns Hopkins University Medical Library Restricted Manuscripts Room. Ruiz didn't stop after the interview with Keller. If anything, It reignited her sense of purpose. She remembered that Elias Mono had once collaborated with a neurologist named Dr. Evelyn Carr, an expert in cognitive degeneration under sensory deprivation conditions. She had been part of Elias's early research cohort during the late 7-second. After 3 days of calls, Ruiz was granted limited access to Dr. Carr's archive notes under strict supervision. Box 14 Ampere contained Elias's final documented work before his disappearance. Inside 4 handwritten journal entries, 2 annotated diagrams of cranial nerve maps, a sealed envelope marked, "Do not publish, destroy after reading." Ruiz ignored the warning. The entries, the handwriting was shaky, but clear, each entry more unhinged than the last. Entry 1, May 13, 1987. Our understanding of external stimuli impact on neural clarity is flawed. Isolation doesn't just impair, it reconfigures. Prolonged exposure to silence, disorientation, and sensory imbalance results in more than hallucination. It allows suggestion. Entry 2, May 26, 1987. The cruise study may be compromised. Passengers are reporting the same dream, a structure underwater, a pulsing tone. Marissa heard it last night. She won't admit it yet. Entry 3, the 4th of June, 1987. If the theory is correct, we're not observing breakdown. We're observing transmission. What if the ocean isn't empty? What if it's broadcasting? Entry 4, the 28th of June, 1987. We're being observed not by the crew, not by the other passengers, but by the space itself. We are in a closed loop, a simulation of control, but something else owns the current. The envelope. Ruiz opened the sealed note. Inside was a short message, unsigned, but clearly Elias's handwriting. To whoever finds this, you were never supposed to know. The sea doesn't forget, and what it holds, it only gives back when it's done watching. There was also a small drawing, a crude outline of a cruise ship, and something beneath it, a silhouette, massive, organic, tentacled, faceless. Ruiz put it down and whispered, "What did you find out there, Elias?" That night, Ruiz scanned the notes and mailed one copy to an old journalist contact in New York. She included no explanation, only one sentence. "If anything happens to me, follow the name Project Morepoint," because now she believed the Monroes weren't just lost at sea. They had drifted into something that watched, learned, and waited. And for some reason, in 1995, it had finally decided to return part of what it had taken. The 6th of October, 1995, 8:12 p.m. Biloxi, Mississippi, private residence of retired officer Dean Holloway. Detective Melanie Ruiz didn't arrive unannounced. She had tracked him through Coast Guard retirement records, narrowed down by service dates near the Dry Tortugas region, and confirmed through a single blurry photograph of the yacht recovery in 1995. The man standing in that photo, barely in frame, was Chief Petty Officer Dean Holloway. He had retired abruptly in early 1996, citing personal health concerns just months after the Monroe's vessel was found. Now, almost a decade later, he answered the door with visible reluctance. "You're here about the Monroes," he said before she could even introduce herself. Ruiz simply nodded. The conversation Holloway sat in silence for a long time after pouring himself a glass of bourbon. He didn't drink it, just held it. "I'm going to regret this," he muttered. Then he began. "We weren't supposed to tow that boat back to shore. Protocol would have been to mark it, log its coordinates, and let a salvage contractor deal with it. But your team boarded it," Ruiz said. "Because we were told to," Holloway replied. "We got a call that morning from a DHS contact. Said there'd be a vessel, no distress beacon, no registration, and if we found it, we were to recover it and transfer it intact to a private dock in Pensacola." He leaned forward, voice lower. "Except that wasn't the only call we got. The second call. Hours after the first contact, Holloway claimed a separate channel came through. No call sign, no traceable origin. The voice said, 'If the name Monroe is found, you didn't find the boat.'" Holloway paused, letting the weight of that settle. "But we did find the name on medical tools, on books, and on that damn photo. Did you report it?" Ruiz asked. "No," because 3 hours later, one of my crewmen, Seaman Tyler Phelps, had a seizure, never had a history of one, said he heard something humming below deck, something that made his teeth ache and his eyes water. Ruiz blinked. Was he okay? He never recovered. Retired that same month. I tried to file a report, but it disappeared in review. I asked around, got called into a meeting with 2 suits I've never seen before. They said, if I valued my pension, I'd keep quiet. The item they were told to ignore. Before they towed the yacht, Holloway said they saw something strange sealed into the wall near the vessel's headboard. A hatch. It looked retrofitted, like someone welded it from the inside, and it had no handle. Ruiz's brow furrowed. Was it opened? No, we weren't even allowed to touch it. I asked about it during offload. One of the federal agents said, it's not for surface personnel. Holloway finally took a sip of his drink and stared out the window. I've boarded wrecks, recovered corpses, even watched a man burn during a fuel burst. But that boat, he shook his head. That boat felt like it wanted to be left alone. Ruiz rose from her seat, quietly sliding her recorder back into her coat pocket. As she left, Holloway said one last thing. It was never about the people, Detective. It was about whatever they brought back. The 8th of October, 1995, 3:44 p.m., Key West, Florida. Portide Mental Health Recovery Center, closed facility. Detective Melanie Ruiz stood at the rusted gate of what once had been the Portside Clinic, a small private psychiatric facility operated quietly along the southern tip of Key West. It had shuttered in 1990, reportedly due to lack of funding, but that wasn't the whole story. A contact inside the Department of Health records had flagged something odd. A patient file admitted under the alias M. Elias in December 1987, 5 months after the Monroe disappearance, and the attending physician, Dr. Richard Kaplan, a neurologist with ties to a now defunct research group called Horizon Lake. Entry denied. The clinic was locked and overgrown. Ruiz managed to get access through a city code enforcement request under the guise of property inspection. She entered through the side window, flashlight cutting through cobwebs and dust. Old filing cabinets lay gutted, but the basement, lined with moldy tiles and collapsing walls, still had its medical archives untouched. She found what she was looking for in room B3, a single black ledger with a fading label. Internal monitoring Horizon Lake transfers 1,986 to 1,989. Inside the ledger, each patient was labeled only by initials and dates, but one entry stood out. Me, admitted 12, 1,987. Symptoms on intake, non-verbal episodes, sensitivity to ambient sound, mutters in Morse sequences, draws repeating circular pattern with internal hatch markings. Incident note, 10388. Patient pulled fire alarm at 3:14 a.m. screamed. It's under the floor. No prior verbal communication on file. Further down, a handwritten note added months later. Patient transferred to Northern Facility. Patient unfit for standard care. Order requested by C.M. Monroe. Ruiz froze. C.M. Monroe. Charlotte Monroe. Elias's sister. A name not found in any previous record. A ghost link. A hidden note. Tucked in the back of the ledger was a folded page not part of any patient file. It appeared to be written by a staff nurse, unsigned in pencil. They told us he was just delusional, but none of us had ever seen someone draw with their eyes closed, same shape every time. And the sound he made, it didn't stop when he slept. It pulsed like a sonar, like something responding. Back in her car, Ruiz placed the ledger on the passenger seat and looked at her notes. If Elias Monroe had been alive in December 1987, months after the declared disappearance, then someone had orchestrated more than a cover-up. Someone had redirected him, erased him from one system, and placed him into another. She circled a new name on her pad. Charlotte Monroe. Last known residence, Baltimore, Maryland. The 11th of October, 1995, 1:27 p.m. Baltimore, Maryland. Midtown Residential Towers, Unit 7B. Ruiz stood outside a faded apartment door on the 7th floor of an aging high-rise. She had traced Charlotte Monroe, Elias's only known sibling, through outdated tax records, a decades-old alumni directory from the University of Maryland, and a single utility bill from 1994 that hadn't been forwarded or cancelled. The door creaked open after the third knock. A woman in her 60-second, thin, wiry hair, pulled into a loose braid, blinked through thick glasses. "Charlotte Monroe?" Ruiz asked. The woman didn't confirm, but didn't close the door either. "I'm here about your brother." The reaction was immediate. Charlotte stepped aside. No questions, no introductions, just one sentence. I was wondering when someone would finally ask what she knew. Inside, the apartment was lined with books, folders, and maps. Newspaper clippings papered an entire wall. In the center, a worn photograph of Elias and Marissa standing on a marina dock, wind-blown, smiling. I was supposed to get a letter when he died, but it never came. Just rumors. Then, in 1988, I got a call from a man who wouldn't give his name. He said Elias was alive, but not the same. Ruiz asked if she ever saw her brother again. I did once from a distance. They let me watch him during a transfer from a private facility to a federal van. He didn't see me. Where was this? A clinic just outside Richmond. The name was burned off the building when I went back, but I remembered the sound. Ruiz frowned. The sound? Charlotte looked up. It was coming from him, like he was breathing in a different rhythm, like his lungs had learned a language we don't speak, the drawings. Charlotte handed Ruiz a box. Inside were dozens of sketches, all made by Elias. Some mailed to her anonymously, others left at her door without explanation. Each showed a recurring motif, a structure beneath waves, towers rising and falling, cables, eyes without faces, and always the same phrase scribbled in the corner of each. "It hears." Louise threaded through them slowly, chills creeping up her spine. These came after his disappearance. Charlotte nodded. All of them from 1989 to 1992. Then, nothing. Before Ruiz left, Charlotte handed her one final item, a cassette tape, still sealed. "The man who called me sent that too. He told me to never play it near a radio." Ruiz took the tape carefully. As she stepped back into the cold Baltimore air, she understood something deeper. This wasn't just about a missing couple or a sunken boat. It was about a frequency, a memory the ocean had refused to bury. And now, it was humming again. The 12th of October, 1995, 6:03 p.m. Washington, D.C. Private Sound Lab, Columbia Heights. Detective Melanie Ruiz didn't trust standard playback. The warning from Charlotte Monroe had stuck with her. Never play it near a radio. Whatever that meant, Ruiz wasn't going to take chances. She brought the cassette to an old sound technician she knew from a previous case, Carmen Vega, a retired forensic analyst who had worked for the National Transportation Safety Board. The lab was tucked behind a repair shop, shielded, analog, secure. Carmen examined the cassette like it was a relic. No markings, no label, no corrosion. Whoever stored this knew what they were doing, she muttered. Ruiz nodded. "Can you isolate it? No wireless, no cloud." Carmen smiled. "Welcome to the last analog lab in D.C. She fed the tape into a refurbished Realtor and hit play. The sound, at first, nothing but static. Then a low thrum, not rhythmic, not musical, more like breathing. Wet, hollow, mechanical, and human at once. Carmen's hand hovered over the volume. Then came the whisper. It didn't have words, it had shape. A loop rising, falling, dipping beneath frequencies the ear almost couldn't detect. Ruiz leaned in closer. "Is it Morris?" Carmen froze. "It's too smooth, too curved. Morse's dots and dashes. This is liquid." She toggled a spectral view on her monitor. There it was, buried beneath the waveform, a visual pattern repeating every 4.7 seconds. A spiral, what the tape was hiding. Carmen ran a series of filters, isolating high tones, flattening background noise, flipping the audio spectrum, and then a voice. Human male, distorted but clear. "We stayed beneath too long. The echo is permanent." She sees with her breath. "Tell C don't answer if she hears the humming. Tell her I'm not him anymore." Then static again, then silence. Ruse sat back, stunned. Carmen removed the headphones and whispered. That voice wasn't recorded through a mic. It was transmitted like a message pulled from a looped signal, but it's been on this tape for years. The metadata. Carmen ran one last test, examining the magnetic alignment of the tape. What she found shouldn't have been possible. The recording was stamped in December 1990, but the signal pattern inside it wasn't developed until 1993, a modulation technique used in deep-sea sonar testing, meaning she looked at Ruiz with disbelief. The voice was embedded after the tape was sealed. Someone injected the message years after the cassette was manufactured without ever opening it. As Ruiz stepped back into the street, the chill of the evening wind didn't compare to the one crawling down her spine. She clutched the tape in her coat pocket, its weight now impossibly heavier. A message, an echo, a memory too deep to drown, and one line kept repeating in her head. Tell her I'm not him anymore. The 14th of October, 1995, 10:46 a.m. National Maritime Archives, Norfolk, Virginia. Ruse had exhausted every obvious lead, so she turned her attention back to where it all began, the cruise ship itself. The SS Asteria, registered out of Nassau, Bahamas, had supposedly gone out of commission in 1988, the year after Elias and Marissa Monroe vanished. Official records said it had been decommissioned, sold, and scrapped in the Long India. But when Ruiz requested archival manifests, shipping logs, and decommission papers through a contact at the National Maritime Archives, what came back didn't line up. The registry for the Asteria had two major issues. One, the final voyage manifest dated the 6th of July, 1987, was blank. Two, the vessel's sail documentation contained a ship ID that didn't match any recorded hull number. Ghost pages. Ruiz was handed the hard copy registry binder, a thick volume of official vessel activity spanning the Mai-Daiti second. Flipping through, she found the Asteria's file. Passenger logs from May and June 1987 were present, neatly typed. Then July 1987, missing. The log skipped directly from the 29th of June to the 2nd of August, omitting the exact week when Elias and Marissa boarded. A handwritten note was scribbled in the margin of that page, filed under OSD, non-standard disappearance, per security directive. Ruiz had never heard of OSD before. She flagged it for later. The ship that wasn't scrapped. Digging deeper, she contacted the Port Authority of Mumbai, which manages ship-breaking operations in Along. A shipping officer responded within a few hours. SS Asteria, not in our records for 1988. The ship with that ID was rerouted in 1989 and never arrived for decommissioning. Last known ping from a coastal monitoring buoy South Atlantic, then signal lost. Ruiz frowned. You're saying the ship just vanished? The officer shrugged over the line. Stranger things have happened. Some ships go dark intentionally, others are flagged. Some get renamed, repainted, and reused. She asked if they had the ping data. They emailed her a raw signal log. A brief sonar reflection dated the 18th of March, 1989, showing a large vessel near the Tristan d'Una archipelago, one of the most remote places on Earth. But what stunned Ruiz was the annotation. No transponder, unknown signature, object stationary for 7 hours before vanishing off scan, no visual confirmation, cross-referencing OSD. Back in Norfolk, Ruiz pulled maritime incident records marked with the OSD label. Only 5 existed from 1980 to 1995. 3 involved disappearances at sea with no debris. 2 were military vessel crossovers. Operations redirected mid-cruise due to undisclosed protocols, but all had a single common thread. 1 or more passengers later reappeared under alternate identities with no memory of the voyage. Ruiz sat in the archive reading room surrounded by volumes of stamped redacted paper. The ship that supposedly sank had never been dismantled. Its final voyage had never been logged, and its passengers, at least some, had resurfaced, changed. She closed the files slowly and whispered to herself, this was never about the boat. It was about what was waiting for them. Off course, the 16th of October, 1995, 3:52 p.m. Port Canaveral, Florida. Retired personnel quarters. Ruiz had followed a name buried in a restricted OSD incident report. Commander Blake Garrison, former U.S. Navy deep-sea recovery diver, honorably discharged in 1990 after an incident classified under psychological instability following mission distress. He now lived in a modest mobile home near the edge of a marina, a recluse with a half-burned uniform and blackout curtains on every window. Ruiz knocked once. A voice called out from inside, already knowing, "You're not the Coast Guard, and you're not here to talk about fishing." She stepped inside. It smelled of salt and varnish. Photos of underwater wrecks lined the walls, but none were labeled. One stood out, a grainy image of a ship's corridor submerged in eerie green-blue haze. In the center of the shot, a man in a diving suit, arms out, frozen mid-step. Ruiz pointed at it, that the Asteria. Blake didn't answer directly, just said, "I went deeper than we were supposed to, and I came back with something they couldn't explain. A scream in my head that never ended. The dive." Garrison described the 1989 operation, a covert salvage mission 200 meters southwest of Tristan d'Unna. The Navy had picked up a long dead ping. No transponder, no flag, but it matched the Asteria's dimensions. His team was deployed for preliminary survey. The ship was pristine. No hull breach, no burn. It looked like it had been placed there. No drift, no drag, just waiting. Inside they found sealed doors, corroded nameplates, furniture still bolted down, no bodies, but something else. There were drawings on the walls in soot, in blood. All the mirrors were broken, and in the galley freezer someone had carved into the metal, "Don't answer the voice in the hallway." The incident. On the third day, one of Garrison's crewmates, Lieutenant Rollins, began acting erratically, claimed to hear music, claimed to see a woman pacing the stairwells, said he had seen the passengers in the dining hall. Rollins vanished on Dive 4. No sign of him ever recovered. The team was pulled, debriefed, files sealed. He said we hallucinated, that nitrogen narcosis caused the stories, but I kept the sonar scan. He pulled out a metal case from under the floorboards and opened it. Inside, a thermal sonar printout. In the image, a humanoid form, not wearing gear, standing inside the ballroom of the ship, head tilted, arms slightly raised, face blank. Time stamped the 18th of March, 1989, 2:23 a.m. The message he never sent. Before she left, Garrison handed Ruiz a sealed envelope. He said, "I wrote this in 91. Meant to send it to a senator. Never did. Maybe you'll know what to do with it." Inside, a hand-drawn map of the Asteria's known path, but with an anomaly point marked with a red X. Alongside it, a note. Something opened beneath the ship, and it didn't close when we left. Ruiz stood outside as the sun dipped into the ocean. The Navy had buried the Asteria, but not because it was lost, because something had been found aboard and no one wanted it brought back to the surface. In her hand, the sonar printout pulsed like a warning. There had been someone on that ship, and they weren't in the manifest. The 19th of October, 1995, 11:31 a.m. Charlotte, North Carolina, Monroe Residence Archive. Ruse revisited the original Monroe case files. She wanted to find something overlooked, something that hadn't been part of the official reports. The storage box containing their personal effects was weathered and dust-coated, labeled simply M and E Monroe, 1987. Inside were the usual artifacts: boarding passes, copies of the cabin reservation, credit card statements, medical licenses. But tucked between two folded pages of Elias Monroe's travel journal, she found a second, nearly identical cruise ticket, handwritten, not printed. The name was E. Vale. It had the same cabin number 7B, but no digital registration, no payment records, no passport, just a name scribbled in ink and a seat assignment at the captain's gala dinner. Ruiz ran it through every database. No matches, no known aliases, no relatives, no license, no trace. And yet, according to the paper seating chart from that night, retrieved weeks after the Monroes disappeared, there had indeed been a third chair at their table. It had been marked Reserved Vale, interview with the cruise photographer. Ruiz tracked down Alan Ditt, now 71, who had worked as the onboard photographer aboard the Asteria in 1987. He remembered the Monroes well. He said they were kind, didn't like the spotlight, but polite. When asked about the third guest, Vale, he paused, then nodded slowly. He said, "I remember someone. Tall man, pale, wore gloves the entire time, never took photos. He just sat there, always at the edge of the light." Ruiz leaned in. "Did anyone else mention him?" DeWitt nodded. "Couple of the stewards said they gave him the creeps. Never saw him eat. Never saw him go to his cabin." Ruiz showed him the photocopy of the mirror image from the Monroe's camera roll, the one with the silhouette behind them. Ditt's face went pale. He said, "That's him. That's Vale. Manifest anomalies." Cross-checking the crew list against the guest log, Ruiz found another irregularity. A steward named G. Atwell was assigned to cabin 7B, but he'd filed a formal complaint 3 days before the disappearance. "I don't believe that man is a registered guest. He doesn't speak. He appears at the window when I pass, even at 3 a.m. Something is wrong in that cabin." The complaint was signed. Then 2 days later, Atwell himself went missing. Official log entry presumed overboard. No body recovered. Ruiz penned a new name on her board. Vale. Last known sighting, the 9th of July, 1987. Seated beside the Monroes, vanished alongside them. Not listed, not paid, but present. And then beneath it, she scribbled, "What if the Monroes weren't the only ones who disappeared, but the only ones we noticed? The 21st of October, 1995, 9:12 p.m. Dockside Motel, Norfolk, Virginia." Ruiz played the cassette from Charlotte Monroe's box for the 3rd time. The tape, warped and filled with static, was labeled only with a black X. She'd transferred it to digital to preserve the sound. There was no introduction, just the unmistakable click of a recorder and the deep inhale of a man preparing to confess. "If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't keep it contained. My name is Elias Monroe." The voice was ragged yet unmistakably his. Ruiz paused the audio, heart pounding. Monroe had been presumed dead for 8 years, and yet, here he was speaking clearly, if nervously, into a recorder. She pressed play again. The crews and the passenger. "We boarded the Asteria under our real names," Marissa insisted. "Said if we were going to take a break from the madness of the hospital, we do it honestly." The first 2 days were perfect. Ocean breeze, no charts to read, no patience, just her laughter. And then the man arrived. He sat across from us at dinner, said his name was Vale. He didn't shake hands, he didn't blink often, and he knew things about us. Details from our past we'd never spoken aloud. Marissa said he gave her nightmares that she dreamed of. A hallway that wouldn't end. The shift in reality. By day 4, the ship had changed. The walls felt tighter. Mirrors fogged over even when dry. Voices echoed when no one else was near. Crew members whispered of engine stalls and time delays. One night, we woke up in the middle of the night. Our clock read 2:08 a.m., but the hallway clocks showed 413. Outside, darkness, but not night. No stars, no moon, just a dull grey like being underwater. And Vale was in the hallway watching, always watching what he saw below deck. The lower decks were sealed, but I found a hatch unlatched near the kitchen service corridor. I went down alone. The corridor had no lights, but I could see. I don't know how, but I could see shapes. I reached a chamber, circular, metallic, breathing like a lung. In the center, a pillar of water suspended, spinning slowly. Inside it, a figure. It saw me. Even without eyes, it saw me. And it said something, not with words, with gravity, with pressure. It said, "You were meant to find me." The final hours. Marissa wanted off the ship, but it was too late. We were far beyond the usual route. Engines said we were stationary, but waves were crashing. The stars weren't moving. Vale came to our door that night, knocked once, then whispered, "Only one of you leaves," she screamed. I fought him, but when I woke, the ship was empty. No crew, no guests, just me. And the sound, low, constant, like the ocean breathing inside my skull. I found a lifeboat, drifted for days, then picked up by a vessel without a flag. They fed me, asked no questions, dropped me near Nova Scotia. I've been hiding ever since. If you find this, tell Charlotte I'm sorry. Tell her the ocean took more than our bones. It took our names. Click. Silence. Ruiz sat motionless for several minutes. The tape had no timestamp, no return address, no proof. And yet, every word aligned with what she had found. The hysteria hadn't just vanished. It had absorbed the truth and sent one man back to tell it. The 23rd of October, 1995, 6:42 a.m. United States Coast Guard Station, Port South, Virginia. Detective Ruiz stood in a hangar lit by a grid of H halogen lamps. Before her, a skeletal remnant of a vessel's hull, twisted, salt-stained, and incomplete. It had been recovered 7 years earlier off the coast of Nova Scotia by a deep-sea trawler. At the time, no identifying marks remained, no flag, no serial number, no name, until a sonar tech, cleaning the debris, found a single corroded plate wedged into the keel structure, initials barely legible as 8714. It took years, but they finally matched it. Asteria passenger cruise vessel disappeared, July 1987, the 1993 recovery file. The wreck had been recovered in 1993, nearly 6 years after the Monroes vanished, and quietly transferred to a Coast Guard outpost under the assumption it was an undocumented cargo ship. No one connected it to a cruise liner. The structural corrosion had altered the hull beyond visual identification, but then Ruiz opened Box 04R and found a sealed envelope marked classified not for civilian review. Inside Polaroids, 4 of them. The first showed the hull from above, the starboard side split open as though it had been peeled from the inside out. The second, a dining room partially intact, plates still on tables. One had food on it, untouched, preserved in a vacuum of salt, water, and pressure. The third, a lifeboat, still docked to its rig, untouched. And the fourth photo, a crew locker, door, a jar inside, a neatly folded uniform with a name tag veil. Ruiz felt her breath catch. They had recovered the vessel. They had catalogued it. They had seen the name. And still the case was marked as no match, intentional omission, deliberate silence, evidence in storage. A technician named Cooper Hall was part of the recovery detail. Ruiz found him working in a shipping yard 3 counties down. When she brought up the wreck, his demeanor shifted. "I shouldn't talk about it," he muttered. She showed him the photo of the name tag. Cooper sighed. There was more. He led her to a private garage behind his house and pulled a weathered crate from under a tarp. Inside a sealed plastic bag labeled Cabin 7B audio recorder damaged. "I shouldn't have kept it," he whispered, but the others were scared, said it was humming. "I couldn't throw it away." Ruiz lifted the recorder, a broken waterlogged device, but etched along the side in scratched metal. E. Monroe. Back at her motel that night, Ruiz stared at her evidence wall. The pieces were lining up. Wreckage, confession, name tags, photographs. But what was missing was why. Why had the Monroes been targeted? Why had Vale been there? And what had they truly found beneath the surface? Something that didn't want to be remembered. Ruiz pinned the photo of the uniform to the center of the board, then circled the name Vale and wrote beneath it, "Not a passenger, not a crew member." Then what the hell was he? The 25th of October, 1995, 11:37 p.m. Norfolk, Virginia. Ruiz's motel room. Detective Anna Ruiz couldn't sleep. The cassette player on her nightstand had been rewound and replayed so many times it now clicked at the end of every loop, like a metronome marking obsession. But it wasn't Monroe's voice that kept her awake. It was the sound beneath it, faint, subaudible, like the low hum of a power station or something breathing through metal. She isolated it, looped it, ran a spectrogram analysis through a software tool borrowed from the forensic audio unit, and that's when she noticed it. The waveform wasn't random. It repeated every 43 seconds. The pattern. She stared at the screen. The pattern pulsed like a distant sonar echo. Ruiz ran it against maritime signatures, engine noises, even marine mammal frequencies.